Welcome, everyone, to another presentation by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. That's PBBI from California State University, Fresno. Welcome to those who are following us here on the Zoom webinar, and welcome to those who are already following us and putting some likes as well. Thank you already on Facebook live. The webinar is also going to be recorded, and it will be archived through the two different formats: the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute's Fresno State YouTube channel, and also through the Portuguese American Oral History Archive at the Henry Madden Library at Fresno State. Great news for everyone that watches. We are in the process of right now putting together the website within the library where folks can go and search for all the different recordings that we have done so far. We are just in the beginning stage. We're very happy to have two guests with us as we continue to explore the history of the Portuguese in California. And it is a very important date. All days are important to all of us as long as we're alive and healthy. But July 1st is Madeira Day. So the autonomous region of Madeira, the archipelago of Madeira, celebrates its day on July 1st, as Portugal celebrates on June 10th, and its sister archipelago, the archipelago of the Azores, on, it depends, that's on the Segunda-feira do Espírito Santo, so they made it hard. It's always a different week and different day every year. We're happy to celebrate Madeira with oral history, because oral history is the history of who we are. A lot of times throughout those of us who've studied history, whether it be in school, at college level, undergrads, graduate studies, etc., sometimes we get a little bit focused on battles and on wars and dates and the history of the people. So the best way to commemorate Madeira in California is to learn a little bit about the history of its people, whether you were an immigrant or first, second, or third, I'm sure even third and fourth generation of Portuguese with roots in Madeira in the state of California. So we have two young ladies, and they're from opposite ends of the state, and from San Diego and from the San Leandro Hayward area. And so we'll go start in the San Diego area with Zeca Rodrigues, and then in the San Leandro area, Inês Eiras. Zeca, I'll start with you, if I can. I'd like to take about, if you will, a few minutes, as long as you need, actually, both of you. We'll start with you to tell us a little bit about yourself, about yourself here in California, and your connections to the archipelago of Madeira.
I was born Maria José Rodrigues and given the nickname of Zeca, and that's what I've been using. Although when I first arrived in San Diego, my cousin changed my name to Mary Jo, which I used for a little bit. And anyway, I came to America in December of 1968 and couldn't speak English. Then eventually graduated from Point Loma High School in 73. And then I went on to study at UC Berkeley and graduated in 1978, actually in physical education with a minor in Romance languages. Through the language department in Berkeley, I went on a work study program to Paris, France in 75. And in 70, I had also been accepted to study at the University of Perugia in Italy, but I got sick and could not do that. After graduating from UC Berkeley, I returned to San Diego and became very involved, not so much with the community itself, but with Point Loma High School and their bilingual and English as a second language program, and just helping immigrants from different parts of the world, but most of them were from Portugal, Mexico, Vietnam. I loved it and designed, actually helped design a curriculum to aimed at teenagers running their households. paying bills, doing the finances, grocery shopping, all the things that I had gone through with my own parents because of them not speaking English. Anyway, I explored at that time the going through a master's program or becoming a physical therapist or teaching degree and so forth. I did none. And I did none because suddenly I was contacted by a maritime attorney here in San Diego who found out I could speak mainly the Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian. And therefore he hired me as his in-house interpreter. And, he could that way communicate with his clients at any time. He represented many fishermen in San Diego. And so through that, I became a paralegal, office manager, and continued interpreting. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last 40 years. So through that work, I have gained a wealth of information about fishing operations and the industry itself, which led me to become very curious about the Portuguese community and particularly how we Madeiras ever got to San Diego. Well, unfortunately, I couldn't find much information on that point. So what I started doing was talking to the old timers, right? The older the people I could find, the better. And so that's been sort of a hobby, but that's how I have developed this connection. But so I don't know if I should keep going or
no, that's great. That's great. We're going to come back to that. I want you to actually talk to a little bit about that experience of all the information that you have gotten from San Diego. We're going to jump up to Northern California. And Inês, your connection to Madeira and your immigrant situation or your parents' immigrant situation.
Well, I was born in Madeira, and I immigrated in the 70s with my 4 siblings. My father had immigrated 3 years before with the 2 oldest siblings. We're 7 siblings. And we were the last, my father's family was the last of his siblings to immigrate.
Geronimo Lopez.
I'm sorry. I got to shut my phone off here. Okay. So yeah, my father was the last one of his siblings to leave Madeira. His siblings had left, his oldest sister had left in 1939 to the United States. And then she called for her sister in 1944. And then his brother had gone to Brazil. One went to Curacao, and then the Curacao ended up in the United States. And so they were all over the place. And my father was the very last one. He stayed in the village of Ponta de Sol, is where we're from. And he came and worked for 3 years at the Embers restaurant in San Lorenzo, San Leandro, that was owned by my aunt, to call for us. And my mom came with us, 5. And we went to San Lorenzo schools, kind of took care of each other. My parents went to work to raise 7 kids. And when I was of age to go to college, I went to the University of Cal State University, Hayward at the time, which is now East Bay. And I graduated with a degree in business, Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with marketing concentration. I also studied Portuguese. I decided that I wanted to get a minor in Portuguese. So I've always been connected to my culture, just have a deep love for it. Even as a little girl, I was 8 years old and I wanted to go see Amalia and got to see Amalia in my Portuguese school. My parents belonged to what was called O Clube Social Madeirense. And that's where I learned Portuguese. Every Friday night, we had Portuguese classes at the club. And it was wonderful. We had these wonderful teachers who volunteered Can't believe they did that all those years. And I was able to do my cuarta class, though I didn't do the exam because that was right before the um, the 1974 when the government was being overthrown in Portugal, and so there was a lot of chaos in the education department. But one of the things that I liked to do growing up was having pen pals and writing to my family in Portugal. I had a mentor, godfather, who was a professor in Lisbon, and he always made me feel like, you got this, and he gave me so much confidence, and I owe a lot of gratitude to him, to my love of culture and language was definitely deepened by his mentorship in my life. So going forward, I went and tried to work in corporate America, and learned early on that I was not a corporate girl, and then got my real estate license and have been a real estate agent for 32 years.
Wow.
So that's been my career, and I've been able to help a lot of people. Real estate agents, they don't just sell homes. We change lives. Sometimes we feel like people shrink, so we solve a lot of problems. And I do work with the Portuguese community. I moved a lady to the Azores, and I know I ended up being being everything to her because all her family was gone. And I walk into her house one day, and she was laying on the ground, ill, and no family here. So I ended up being her nurse and doctor too, um, which was a real joy. We're very good friends now, and I get to visit her when I go to Terceira, which is really great. So I love what I do. It's it's something that I started through my family business. My family started investing in real estate, and I was started at 15 years old, basically property managing for my parents. They didn't speak English, so I was the one that, went and evicted somebody without even being of legal age. And I just went out and did it. So I just learned to grow up very fast and take care of problems. And I'm a problem solver, and help my parents in every possible way till I got married and established a home of my own and raised a family. I have two sons, 27 and 22.
Wow.
Um, yes, and
Indeed.
my siblings all live in the Bay Area, except for one that lives in Ojai, California, and she is incredible. I am very proud of her because she has been such a voice for our Madeira culture in terms of music. She plays the briguinha and sings Madeira music. So we have a good time with that. We represent our island whenever possible. For probably 40 years, my father and mother and friends and family would go to the Festa Thornton, where they had Bodlate, and there was a family there from Canhas that invited us one year, and then we just kept coming year after year. My father was a musician. He's now no longer with us. My brother's a musician, my sister's a musician, and we all kind of sing a little bit. We have fun. My mom loves to sing. She is not the singer that she used to be. She's had a little bit of a challenge, but she definitely has her memory, and she leaves a lot of great things for us to pass on to future generations. Um, for many years, she started a lot of Madeira traditions at the Bom Jesus Milagroso. One of them was making the bread. She was one of the first ladies to make the bolo do caco.
Mm.
And she also started some traditions there that are still being done. One of them is the Romagens de Natal, where the groups get together and they have a ranchinho. And of course, we're not doing that, but there are still people that are running the organization that are very, very talented and that are making these traditions continue. And I'm very proud of them for doing that. Um, what else with me? With my love of culture, I decided a few years back when I was serving in the Bons Jesus board, and my husband was serving on the Filarmónica do Recreio do Imigrante Português de Newark, California. He was one of the, I think, vice presidents, was the vice president. And at the time, we were kind of split. I was in one place, he was in another place, and there was all these events happening. And we'd say, well, how are we going to promote these events when we're just all over the place? So I had this idea of forming this Facebook group when Facebook was brand new, and I started this Facebook group called Portuguese Culture and Social Events in California. And I invited everyone in to post all of their things and to have us unified in one place. And I always felt like I had a little bit of cultural knowledge to give, and that was my ministry to give to my community. The other thing that made me very motivated with teaching people about our culture is the city that I'm from in San Leandro has a big contingency of Portuguese roots, and there were a lot of third, fourth, washed down Portuguese people that I would meet up with at coffee shops sometimes in the morning. And I would overhear their conversations about how they felt about, their mother-in-law or this and that, and, they're Portuguese. And I felt that there was a lot of just not misinformation. And it kind of bothered me. And I said, no, we got to do something. I have to do something about this. I have to educate them about the great culture that we have. And in one of those coffee meetings that we had, we actually invited this 90-year-old, actually he was 80 something at the time, to go with us to Terceira Island in the Azores, where my husband's from, to go to the São Joaninas. And he was all excited because he was a descendant of Terceirenses. And I mean, talk about making this man's, a day in life. He had a great old time, and we took him to all the festivities. He kept up with the teenagers, and we took pictures of him jumping over a wall so he wouldn't get hit. He wouldn't get, injured by the bulls that were running after him. And I actually filmed it and showed it to all the people that were there at the coffee shop. It was unreal. It was just a great story. But anyway, so I'm going off topic, and basically just to say how much I love to talk about our culture and to spread it and to spread the great will of the Portuguese people and the island of Madeira, the Azores, Portugal. Today we're talking about Madeira. Behind me on the screen is my village where I was born, Ponta do Sol, the church I was baptized in. And I'm very proud of the island that I come from, very proud of my people, very proud of all the things that they had to endure in the past to be who they are today.
Indeed. Indeed. And we're going to dive into a little bit to the history of the Madeiras in California. There are a couple of distinct areas, and both of you will correct me. I'll start with Zeca, because I'm probably going to be wrong, but there are a few. When we think about Madeiras in California, folks from the archipelago, mostly I'm sure from the island of Madeira, but I'm sure some from Porto Santo. We look at and we think in generalities, of course. We think of San Diego, we think of the Hayward, San Leandro, East Bay area, and we think a little bit of Sacramento. I know a few personally. I know a few of them that are Portuguese who are from Madeira in Sacramento, and a little bit in here, some parts of the west of the San Joaquin Valley. There's a little community here called Lemoore, actually a good-sized city nowadays, where there were a few Madeira families, one of the few areas in the Central Valley where there were some families from the island of Madeira. So Zeca, in your research and your personal knowledge of someone who immigrated from Madeira with your parents, give us a little bit of a synopsis of the Madeira folks in San Diego, and why San Diego?
Right. Actually, I should have told you, I was born in a very, very small, even smaller than Puente del Sol probably, a village called Paul do Mar. And what's interesting about Paul is that most of the people who are from Madeira here in San Diego are from this one little village. Okay. We have maybe, a handful of people from other villages, including, a couple from Funchal, but they're minimus. So most of the people in Pool are from, in San Diego that are from Madeira have this Pool do Mar connection. And then you have one of the things that I learned was that I've spoken to different people, and so there are people from Madeira, from Pool, in the San Leandro area. I have cousins up there and whatnot, and actually in the early days, some of the people kind of stopped there, but then they ventured off to the coast and started fishing rather than construction and agriculture. So that was kind of the connection. They started going, fishing up and down. Some initially stopped in San Pedro and lived in San Pedro for a while until eventually, Madeiras called Point Loma or San Diego their home. From what I can tell, the early Madeiras were here in around 1910. I have a personal connection with an aunt. Her name was Veronica Falante, and she was actually a great aunt. And she arrived in San Diego around 1930. She did immigrate to America, Lowell, Massachusetts in 1920. And she was kind of a remarkable lady because, and I remember her from her going back to Paul, and the many times she went. And I remember her because she would bring people back with her. So in the early days, like in 1920, when she first came, she brought with her a companion, which was her brother, right? And then when she came to San Diego, she would go back, and she was already married and had left her children, younger children, with her mother, and then brought a niece who was already a teenager and could work, and so she could support her family. So she would make these trips all through, the 1940s and whatnot, and just try to help people as she came. My memory of her is probably in the early 1960s or so, where I remember her going back, and I loved to sit right next to her because she smelled so good. And then I was at awe when she would dress up on a weekday just like it was Sunday. I mean, her clothes were just incredible, and she had a thing about her, and so it was kind of like I remember she would give us like truquinhos, little change, so we could buy some stuff, and it was just like it was out of this world. But she truly was, for Madeira here in San Diego, she truly was a pioneer of that. There were other people that came as the fishing and whatnot. And I remember I spoke with Mrs. Mary Nunes. She was, when I spoke with her, she was probably already in her late 80s, early 90s. And she had immigrated from Madeira, and she was also from Poole. She had immigrated from Madeira and went to Massachusetts. And she said that when she remembers, she just was not happy to be Massachusetts. And, she was there because her husband was there and they wanted to make a better living. But were hearing about how fishing was so good. And she started getting letters from, family and friends about how fishing was so good in San Diego, and they, they should consider moving. And that the most importantly, she heard how the weather was just like Madeira. So there was no turning back. That was her, we used to say that was a gold rush, come to San Diego for the weather. And so from her, it was just kind of, that was sort of the exodus from the East Coast into the West Coast, from Madeiras and into San Diego. Now, there are a lot of very different stories about people coming to San Diego. And I'm talking about people from Peru. So there's this lady, her name is Mary Freitas now. And in talking to her, I found out that she had immigrated when she was 10 years old. She came by herself. What had happened was her mother and her had been called to come to America through her mother's sister, and everything was approved and they were coming. When she got to Funchal to board the boat, she couldn't come because she had skin tags. So she had to stay behind with her grandmother. The mother had to come because otherwise they would have lost all their money. So she stays behind. And when she's 10 years old, a year later, she's put on the boat and she comes to America. Wow. By herself. Wow. And I asked her, I said, weren't you scared? She says, I don't think so. Just the excitement of knowing that I was going to see my mother again and knowing that I was going to be meeting all my family. Fear never entered into the equation, right? So anyway, and there's others like this. There's this guy here who's a very prominent fishing management company guy. And when I talked to him, he came when he was 7 years old by himself. And what he remembers, his mother put him on a plane. This was already in the, I believe, late 50s, early 60s. His mother put him on a plane, and he remembers he had this little suit, and on the pocket of the suit was his name and the address where he was coming to. He says, I felt like a package. And there's more into that whole thing, but anyway, these were the stories that kind of made the Portuguese in the Madeiras in San Diego. And so, when we look about through the Madeiras in San Diego, we look at the many routes that people came and Madeira in San Diego, the immigration is a little bit different than most Portuguese communities. And I think it's different from this. So, we discovered Brazil in the 1500s. We're sending people to Brazil. Well, some of the boats kind of got lost along the way. Some of them went into Curacao and Venezuela. Well, jobs were good. The oil industry was good. And so people started coming through that. Well, and then, of course, about the whaling and mainly the Azores. But what was also happening in the 1800s, around 1876, Hawaiian Islands went to Madeira, and they actually got people to come, mainly families who came to, the very long trip from Madeira to Hawaii to work on the sugarcane fields. Well, the reason I'm bringing this out, because there is a San Diego connection. So I got my DNA a couple of years back, and lo and behold, I find in my DNA results that my DNA is probably found in Madeira Island and Hawaii. So somehow in the past, there's a connection there. But what was also very interesting is that I was doing a presentation on fishing a couple of years back, and a woman came up to me, Chinese, and she says, I was born in Hawaii, and but I know that my grandfather was from Paul do Mar, Madeira.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is.
So so anyway, we talked, and I came to trace because what she said was that at some point she grew up in Los Angeles, and she remembered that her father used to come to San Diego to visit a cousin. Okay. So I'm like going, I got to find out. I mean, I know everybody in Peru. I got to find out where these people are from. And she tells me that she had actually gone to Peru to find out about her grandfather's family, and had given me some information. Lo and behold, I'm able to make the connection of her family and who they are here in San Diego. So we have that connection through the Hawaiian Islands. Now, the next thing that was happening was, as you know, in the early 1900s, fishing became very popular in San Diego. And so like my father, he had immigrated he had left Portugal in around 1940, long before I was born. But he went to work in Venezuela, Curacao, and Brazil, and eventually made his way into Panama, and was able to get on a fishing boat and work in the U.S. tuna fleet. At that point, it was primarily what's called pole fishing, is when you use the pole and line, which is an incredible way to fish. And so he made really good money doing that. So much so that when he was in his 40s, he went back to Portugal and decided, I don't want to fish anymore. I don't want to go anywhere anymore. I want to stay home with my family. Well, only after a couple of years, he's going nuts, because he loves fishing. And then he also had a taste of what's called the purse seining system, which are luxurious tuna fishing vessels. And so he just decided, you know what, I want to go back fishing, but he didn't want to come without us. So my mother had a brother who already lived in San Diego, had married in San Diego, and he was a US citizen. So he called for us to come. And so, and my brother, who was already in his teen years, and my father at that time was very concerned that he was going to be called into the military service. So that was another way of, parents just, as soon as their kids were teenagers, you made sure you got them out of Portugal or out of Madeira, and that was one of the things. So they would usually send them to Panama, because then they could get a job on the U.S. tuna boat. So, and so what would happen with that is, the tuna boats would come into San Diego, and then, people fell in love, and then, you have Madeiras from San Diego, and that was a very, very good way of bringing people home, because people from Madeira, at least my understanding at that time, is you could go into Panama or Ecuador, but mainly Panama at that point, and the reason for that was because tuna vessels were offloading their catch in Puerto Rico at the time. And so they had to cross the Panama Canal. So once they ported, they went a port into Panama, they could hire crew, right? And so you hired your family. So that's kind of how that came about. And then, there's the way the Portuguese came to here to San Diego, and again, very different than up north, is we have the tuna industry, right? And the Portuguese in San Diego created the U.S. tuna fishing industry, and basically made it the global industry that it is even today. Now, I have to say that this claim is usually given to the Italians, and we must correct this, okay? The Italians were influential, but when you look back at records and everything else, so shipbuilding records, the Portuguese owned most of the vessels. When you look at the innovation made to the fishing industry itself, the Portuguese, and not necessarily just Madeiras, but a lot of people from the Azores, very influential in the innovation of, create like the Medina panel, which is Harold Medina, is a method that is still used to this day. And that method was to save the porpoise. So he was very good. My own brother, coming as a teenager, basically with cuarta class, was a captain in the industry in many boats, and he designed what's called the mechanical brailer, and it's a way that you use this to scoop the fish from the ocean or the net to the boat, which again revolutionized the industry itself. And so the tuna industry was in the 1970s the third largest industry in San Diego. Okay, it was preceded only by the Navy and aerospace. So San Diego in the 1970s was known as the tuna capital of the world, right? And we had, in that time span, from I want to say from the 1910 to 1980, most of the people were Portuguese. The shipbuilders, the owners of the boat, the officers on these vessels, the cannery workers, all of this, it was just mainly Portuguese. One thing that many people may not know is during World War II, we had what was called the tuna clippers. It's the small tuna boats, still fishing with bird. So in World War II, there were 252 tuna vessels that were asked by the government to give their vessels, in essence, for service. They were called YPs, or yard patrol boats. And the reason for that is, number one, the vessels were conducive to exactly what needed. Number two, they could go into very shallow waters, which needed to be monitored at that time. And number three, the fishermen were expert navigators. So, they could go anywhere. So basically, there were 52 vessels that went into, they just basically painted these boats gray and gave them a number and put, guns on them, and they became Navy vessels. And very, very, and a very, very important part of that. So, which very few people know, even as Portuguese, So, so those are kind of the things that I guess the connection here in San Diego. I have been trying. I was kind of pulled on a couple years back to give a presentation on tuna fishing, and and I was kind of going, I'm a woman, why should I be presenting tuna fishing? But I had an understanding of it, so I did a presentation, and I invited like 8 of our old timer fishermen to come in. Number one, to make sure that what I was saying was right. But number two, so that they could share their own experiences. And from that, I've been asked to do a couple more presentations, and really spark this whole idea of people need to know about us Portuguese in San Diego, and what we have done and contributed to, city. So, I go on, so please stop me.
No, that's great. No, you
But
gave us a lot
you
of
have any-
information. No, you gave us a lot of information. I'm going to go back to a couple of points. Actually, I'm going to
Okay.
turn to Inês to ask her a little bit about. So, Northern California is a little obviously different, as Zeca said. There are quite a few Madeiras as well in your area, and of course not involved as heavily in fishing. I met at one time. Probably because everybody was one way or another. It was either the land or the sea,
Correct.
And the very first actual, according to Dr. Eduardo Mayon Dias, the very first whaling station established by the Portuguese,
Yes.
were in Monterey area. Was established by Madeirans and Azorians together. And so a little bit about when you Inês came to, you had family here, as you said, and so there was a family connection already. One of the reasons that brought you obviously to the area, the restaurant that your dad worked at. What some of your initial feelings? You came very young, obviously, but some of your initial feelings when you arrived here, and how have you seen the community evolve? And obviously we're all Portuguese, whether we're from Madeira, the Azores, or mainland Portugal. But how would you see, in the specific case, the Madeira community? You've been very involved with Bom Jesus Milagroso. It's one of the very few Portuguese halls that are dedicated to Madeira in California. So tell us a little bit about the Madeira presence that you have felt and has been part of your life there in the East Bay.
Sure. Well, I need to let you know that besides Hayward, East Bay, there was a community that was very prominent at one time that was related to sugar, and Madeira is related to sugarcane. And in Crockett, California, I don't know if you've ever heard of that town, but there was a refinery, C&H refinery. And that was a location where many Madeirans landed and lived and worked at the C&H factory. It happened in the turn of the century, the beginning of the 1900s, where some Madeirans, came to California and they worked at the refinery, and some actually went back. One of my cousin's grandfathers made his money at the refinery and bought some very nice real estate in Funchal, Madeira. And then my aunt, when both of my aunts, the ones that came in 1939 and 1944, they both worked at C&H, and that was their first residence, was Crockett, California. And then they made their way into the East Bay. And one of the things that I find very interesting, being married to an Azorian family, is that I found that many Madeirans thought it was a good idea to own real estate. And a lot of Madeirans are in the real estate business as investors. They own real estate, they own rentals. And I've noticed that that's something that it's a commonality. Not that the Azorians don't, I know a lot of them do. We're outnumbered by so many percentage points in terms of the population. But for the little numbers that we are, it seems to be a commonality that I think, because of being in an island where there were more people than plots of land, I think land was a very prized commodity, and it's something that's part of the Madeiran culture for sure. There, I know when I first arrived, I felt that the community in Hayward was very tight. They used to celebrate at least three, four, three famous festas that happen all the time, which is a festa do in August. It's Nossa Senhora do Monte, which was like the big festa in Funchal, and in September, right around Labor Day weekend, it's the Festa do Bom Jesus Milagroso, which was the big festa of Ponta Delgada in Madeira. And then there's Nossa Senhora do Loreto, which is in Calheta. And so these three festas were the things that the Madeirans lived for, and they had this plot of land that was owned by these Madeiran men that in the early 1921. And I actually met a girl through ancestry who happens to be a distant cousin. Her father donated the land to the Bom Jesus. I thought that was very, very interesting that she could share the story, and that they're celebrating the 100 years. So they, at that time, her, a different generation, obviously, but they were in the agriculture business. They had buggies. They took their horses. I understand my aunts also lived in San Jose and in the Cherryland area of Hayward, and there was fruit drying operations, and then also some chicken um, businesses. So they were in agriculture, and the Cherryland area of Hayward was very uh, rooted with Madeiran people, Portuguese people. Again, I came very young, so there's a lot that I need to learn. But I do know that the San Leandro, for example, where I live, many people that had a connection to being Portuguese were descendants of an older immigration that went into Hawaii in the mid 1800s. So, we have those people in San Leandro that have, very distant Madeiran heritage. But so we have kind of a new arrivals from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then older descendants. So it's kind of nice to have this mix of people, and we all share information that we have from the various levels of Madeirensidens or Madeirensidad that we have, that we can share with each other today. And I find that today more than ever, people really want to connect to their island. A lot of times in the past, I find that a lot of our ancestors did not want to talk about their arduous work, their arduous lifestyle. And it was difficult. It was almost like it hurt them. And so they didn't share as much as we would have liked them to share, or some. And so people are reaching out. They want to know, and they want to know about their genealogy. They want to know about what life was like. And so there's definitely a thirst and a hunger for it. Our numbers here in the Bay Area of Madeirans are small, and we are getting smaller and smaller as our descendants will marry non-Portuguese. So, then we become more and more distant from the core culture. So I find that more than ever before, we need to unite and and try to preserve what we have. And San Diego is amazing. I've been there quite a few times, and love the people there of San Diego and their spirit. Um, I was able to meet some of the fishermen in the 1980s that my parents became friends with, and they used to take their trips down there all the time to make sure they got their tuna fish. They
Yeah,
always brought back
absolutely.
tuna, and we still have friends in San Diego today that we
There you go.
visit that
Cool.
were tied to the tuna business, the tuna industry. So it's a great connection. Um,
Excellent.
Let me ask both of you a question, and this time we'll start with you, Inês, instead of starting with Zeca. How does a community that's so small, and that's not the case in San Diego? I think the community in San Diego is actually, and Zeca will of course correct me, there, but it's in relationship to the other Portuguese, which are mainly from the Azores. How does the community that's so small continue with its specific traditions that are specific to the islands of the, just like some specific elements to the Azores, some specific elements to northern Portugal, to southern Portugal, and of course there are specific elements that are Portuguese, but they are Madeira, and some of the festivals that you just mentioned, for example. So how does a community so small keep their traditions alive? I mean, we know what they've done, and it's been an amazing job, but how do you see it continuing and not being totally englobed by the Azorians, with all due respect to my archipelago? But, it depends. Sometimes when you're a very small number, it's very hard to have that
Correct.
specific identity survive.
Well, I find that when you're small, you need to open up and share what you have with everyone else. And I find that because there was quite a large number of Azorians in California, that a lot of Azorians did not know about our culture, and that uh, a lot of them want to know. They just didn't have the opportunity to know. And I think sharing the festas and inviting them, and they're already doing that. It's a very I think the communities today are more melded together and cooperating together. No one is saying, "Oh, well, this is the Madeira Festa." We want everyone there, and I want to go to all the Azorian festas, and I want everyone wants to have experiences, and so I believe that just sharing our culture with one another is how to preserve our culture going forward. Is having everyone involved, whether you're from Madeira or not, doesn't matter. It's people. We need to share what we know, what we have with our others, our compatriots from, and not just for our compatriots, but from people from other cultures. You know, we see a lot of families that are intermarried into American families. A lot of people want to have a culture that they can identify with, and they love having being married into a Portuguese family, a Madeiran family, an Azorian family, and I find that that's the way to keep the traditions alive, is to keep having events, inviting other people, whether they're from Madeira or not, and teach them how to dance the bailinho, the marcha, or whatever. You know, join in our do our estadas. They're doing that already, and
Yeah.
you know, invite them to the festas and invite them to be part of the board, be part of the be a festeiro. We don't call them mordomos, we call them festeiros.
That's, yeah.
And we've done that already. They're doing that already. I'm not serving on the board, but they're doing a fantastic job there, and I'm sure they will going forward. It's a fun place. There are other places that existed before that were not a festa place per se. The APUMEC, for example, was part of what is now the PFSA. And, you know, in the old days, I heard that they did a lot of festas in Oakland. Oakland was a big community for Madeirenses. In fact, I don't know if you people know this, but Oakland and Funchal are sister cities that are inactive because of that old correlation of having a lot of people from Madeira in Oakland. So, yeah, we're not seeing any more immigration. It's too fun to live in Madeira. I don't see why they want to come here. In fact, I see the opposite happening, where people from here would like to retire or work in Portugal. The village that you're looking at is a digital nomad village. It's one of the few in Europe, in Portugal, and Madeira is the only one. And there's all kinds of people, from young people from all over Europe, staying in the village now, working remotely from their computers and looking at this beautiful view. So, yeah, so it's you know, things are kind of turning. We get people so excited about our our country, our villages, our island, that they want to go back and experience it. So that's what it's all about. And you know, we're not going to all be in one place for the rest of our lives. You know, we can be here today, and who knows, maybe I'll be living somewhere else in a few years and experiencing something different. But we can all be ambassadors wherever we are.
Indeed, indeed, and of course, Zeca, same thing there. So San Diego, of course, Azorians, mainlanders as well. It's one of the areas that actually
Yes.
has mainlanders, which a lot of areas don't. Folks from mainland Portugal, and you kind of have a little bit of all three of the parts of
Yes.
Portugal. But is the Madeira probably a bit more significant than some other areas? So how did the Madeira community keep their foot in the DESs and all of the other
Right.
organizations that exist there?
Well, I think here in San Diego, we have a good base of young people who are getting more involved. I think also because a lot of Madeiras and Azorians intermarried, and so they kind of want to keep up with their parents' culture. So I think that kind of helps. We have here in San Diego, I was talking earlier about my aunt Veronica, who came first. She established what's called Humarias, which is singing groups that go into to church on Christmas Eve, very traditional in Paul de Mar. And that practice is actually done up to this day. She introduced the Reis, which is, you know, singing from house to house, which again is done still today. We have a Madeira organization called Santo Amaro, Festa do Santo Amaro, and that's predominantly Madeira, but we have opened that several years back. We opened that to anybody of Portuguese descent. So we kind of exchanged the traditions. I remember when I first came to San Diego, I came to a melting pot of Portuguese culture. It was the first time I had met anybody from the Azores. Okay, I had known a couple of people from the continent, but other than that, I mean, and it was just trying to learn each other's traditions. We all have, like, we cook malasadas, they cook filões, but it's kind of the same melting pot. And so that was always very interesting to me. So here in San Diego, we keep the UPSES, which is mainly our hall, keeps a lot of the traditions alive. We have a very good group, the dancers who are very good, and so it's always fun to watch them perform. We do have a Bunjzus, interestingly enough, but it's ran by, I believe, people from Pico. So it's not a Madeira thing, but now we kind of intermingle with each other, and like I said, the younger people are getting more and more involved in all of those different activities and communities. And just a few years back, somebody went to Paul for the summer and got introduced to what's called the Festa da Lapa, and lo and behold, the following year we were celebrating Festa da Lapa here. So and there's kind of different things. I know for myself, I like taking my my nieces and nephews, at least two of them at a time, and I take them to Portugal, the Madeira, and introduce them to that, and they absolutely love it. After that, they want to learn Portuguese, right? So I think that's one good thing, to have that connection, to always go back, not forget where we came from, but really embrace where we are and the opportunities that this land has given us. And when I look back and I think, wow, how amazing was it that us from Paul do Mar landed in San Diego. It was kind of funny. I was talking to a friend of mine just recently, and I may be going off topic, but the area of La Playa here in San Diego is probably the richest area in San Diego. It's right on the water. Well, that's where the Portuguese first settled, and nobody wanted to live there at that time, into probably the 1930s, because it was very stinky. That's where people dried out their fish. That's where the Portuguese dried out the fish. You couldn't get water over there. Well, now you can't touch a shack for a few $1,000,000. But, I was just kind of like, it's amazing that we live where we live, and that we came from where we came from. The sad thing about all of this is, with the tuna industry kind of like disappearing, it's no longer in San Diego. The base is no longer here in San Diego, but it's in American Samoa. So now you have people from different places, including people from Paul, who, instead of coming and trying to get into the United States, just can go directly to Samoa and get on their boat. So you don't have that influx of immigration as much anymore. But you still have you still have the management and everything else from here, and so it just keeps that alive. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did very well, as always, both of you. I had promised you about an hour, but we're going to go over, if it's okay with the both of you, a little bit more. A couple of things. First of all, you both touched on something that I think is important, that we discuss a little bit further. which is the Portuguese American community. We talked quite a bit extensively during the first hour about your personal experiences. I appreciate that. And also the communities that you're both part of in two different opposite parts of the state, but with lots of commonalities because close to water and everything else. But now moving it to today and forward, and both of you touched upon that already a little bit within you and the younger generation and the newer communities that are coming through. There is this sense of in the Portuguese community, and maybe it's a little bit apocalyptical in some people's mind, but there is this sense in the Portuguese community that the communities are changing drastically, that the communities are not the same that they were 50 years ago. Nothing's the same as it was 50 years ago. And nothing is going to be the same. I tell still my students, when I left the Azores in 1968, the island of Terceira, for example, the major transportation method in most of the islands of the Azores was still the ox cart. So, things have changed. When I went back a few years later, when I left the street I lived in, there were 2 cars in 1968.
Right.
When I went back 4 years later, there were already 10 cars. And now I go back and every family has like 3 or 4. So the idea, the life changes there as it changed here, as Inês mentioned with her beautiful village there, where people can live there. And we have Portuguese Americans living back in different parts of mainland Portugal, Madeira and the Azores, and actually working for multi companies in the technology world and doing their work from there. So knowing that, let me ask you that in your 2 areas. So the overriding theory, let's put it this way, within our community is that the community is changing and everybody's concerned about how is the community going to be 5 years from now, maybe too soon, but 15, 20, 25 years from now. Portuguese language is certainly not the same that it was when you arrived, or when I arrived also in 1968. Portuguese radio is existent now in a different format, but it's not the same that it was in the 1960s and 70s. And so the community is changing in all different ways, and we don't have to look very far. We can look at our own families, and my sons were both born here. They speak Portuguese and they write and read in Portuguese. My grandchildren don't. And so it just, that is kind of the law of the land, it seems like, with most families. 350,000 in California, according to the latest census, that we will have some numbers, of course, as you know, later on this year. But 350,000 is of last census. And according to the surveys that were done on that, only 31,000 of those 350 claim that they still speak some Portuguese at home. So 31,000 out of 350 means that over 90% of those who claim to be of Portuguese background don't speak any Portuguese. So my 2 questions to you, as we contemplate on the community today, as we got this historical background from both of you, and I appreciate it, is how do we look, and now just in generality of the Portuguese American community, whether you're from Madeira or Porto Santo or Corvo or Trás-os-Montes, how do we look at the Portuguese American community past past what we're living today, different areas, and Inês can elaborate on that. Her area, for example, especially the San Jose area, is not the San Jose I knew in 1970. Everyone used to live around the Cinco Chagas Church, and now there's very few Portuguese families in Cinco Chagas Church. They're all up in the mountains, or they're driving to Tracy or wherever. And so because of all this, because of the cosmopolitan areas growing and people looking for other areas and other opportunities, because of what you mentioned also, both of you, which is people marrying folks outside of the Portuguese ethnicity, and other ethnic groups as well, people for job opportunities, better education, more job opportunities as well. So there's a host of reasons why the community will be different. My question is, how do we maintain what we have? And are we being too idyllic by thinking that we can maintain what we have had in the last 40 years, because the community is already different and certainly will be different 20 years from now? So your thoughts on that? We'll start with Inês.
That's a very deep rooted question with a lot of thought. But It's something that we've been thinking about in general all over the Portuguese community for a while now. Um, well, I think that we will never be able to go back 50 years and have what we had 50 years ago. That's just not going to happen. Um, we have to look at what we have now and accept the fact that our societies may be a little bit more skeletal, or we have to change what the societies offer that our children and grandchildren, I don't have any yet, but future grandchildren would want to have, whether it's, I don't know, the generation now of my millennial sons, they want to have experiences. So experiences is the key word, and we have to do something in our society to create experiences for the millennial generation and their kids. Although a lot of them are settling down and buying homes and all that, but that has been what has been shared with me, that traveling, if we can find ways to get them to travel to Portugal with family or non-family, to find out more about the traditions, while there, maybe have them enter the folklore circle, and just kind of develop a love for these things that they can bring back to their communities,
Mhm.
and
Sure. So a little bit more connection with
a little more
Portugal.
connection and focus on them. And because there's been a lot of focus on what the older people want, what the older people like. We want to grab onto the past. We did it like this. We understand that the immigrants tend to hold on to traditions longer than even some of the people that live in Portugal, because we have a mentality of when we left, our parents, even us sometimes. And so sometimes when we see something change, oh, that's not like it used to be. But Madeira and the Azores and the mainland is not what it used to be either. If you go to any town, they're not listening to all Portuguese music. They're listening
Yeah.
to international music, American music. And there's only a few that like the more traditional, but they know that the traditional is what sells tourism. So they're never going to give up our traditional music. We're not going to give up our fado, our bailinho, our chamarrita. So I think as our organizations start to see the skeletal, um, I see a lot of my mom's friends passing away. My mom, no longer is mobile like she was. She's not active. She's in a state of where we need to take care of her now. And so things change. And with her, along of a lot of them have gone already. And so we have, I guess I'm the senior generation. So whoever is even younger than I needs to uh, look at the societies and say, what can we give our future generations to have the experiences that they need to feel connected to their culture? Whether, it may not be having a festa all the time. It might be, having, going on a trip with a bunch of kids their age, or, uma excursão or something like that.
Uh-huh.
Or putting together a group of young people that want to go experience something in Portugal. And Madeira has this right now, where you can have your young adults go experience the culture and learn the language in Portugal. The government is offering it. So things like that our societies need to be more in tune to what our, and not just our children, but their partners. Like Denise, I'm sure that your sons, if they're married, they may not be married to Portuguese.
They're not
And so if they're interested,
either married or partner, but there's no
okay. So
both of them have a wife and a
just saying,
girlfriend that are not Portuguese. Yes.
Uh-huh.
our children's partners are
Yeah.
not going to be Portuguese
Sure.
necessarily, but they will
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, yeah.
And we need to
My
remember
eldest
that.
son is his wife is not Portuguese, and my of all different. She's
But does she
a
love
mixture of different
but she
European and
probably loves
yeah.
our culture, right?
Sure, sure. And my
Yeah.
youngest son, his girlfriend is also not Portuguese. So
So
it's just that, yeah,
we need to
it's
create something for them.
sure.
Yeah. I,
And alliances with other ethnicities as well, because we have a lot in common.
Absolutely.
Zeka, your thoughts on the same subject? I mean,
yeah,
how do we
I
move this
like
forward?
I like and agree with Inês that experience and travel. I saw it in my own family. Is kind of a trigger that ignites the passion of being Portuguese. And so if we could do something like that, that would be great. Here in San Diego, and then we have one additional thing, and that is when these kids experience Portugal, be it mainland or the islands, have the internet, so you can explore, and they come up with more things that they learn to love, and that's what we need to. Of course, the traditions, the festas and whatnot, um, they may not be here for a long time, but right now, especially particularly here in San Diego, that's still a good connector. I mean, when we have the festa, we see people. One of the reasons I love the festa is because I get to see people I haven't seen in years who come back, who either have moved out of San Diego or out in the outskirts. So, and just kind of always being welcoming. Of course, the food is always a good thing to bring people in. I think one of the things, and one of the sad things here in San Diego, it's a grace and a curse in that the Portuguese fishermen worked very hard, and made many a sacrifice to fish. They earned good money, and their families' lives became so much better. The price they had to pay, they were never home to their families. But what that did, and so when I look back and I think about 1970s, even in the beginning of 1980s, when fishing was still good here in San Diego, you would ask any teenage boy, and the day after high school, he had a job to go fishing. And some of them were just because they were going to make really good money. And a lot of them were because that gave them an opportunity to spend time with their parent, with their father. And so, but as far as fishermen families became more affluent, all of a sudden kid education became very important to them. So they were sending their kids to school. And so these kids are now doctors and lawyers and accountants and whatnot. And so they've lost that fishing connection. They've lost the thread. And I say it's a blessing and a curse because it's a good life for them, but unfortunately, it's kind of. And then you have another blessing and curse is what we've been talking about. It's the marriages, being open to marrying, into different cultures and people, and so, unless one person or the Portuguese person is really sharing his or her Portugal love for the culture, then it has that tendency to kind of go away. Um, I'm still hopeful here in San Diego that we're getting more young people involved. You know, I see a little bit of a problem like with Santo Amaro because it has the Madeira traditions, San Juan de Praia and the festa and whatnot. And our members are getting older and dying and whatnot. But you kind of got a new group of young people who are starting to get involved, and by young I mean in their 20s and 30s. So I'm kind of still hopeful that things will continue, and you know, I agree with, like I said, I agree with Inês that maybe a creating a um, creating maybe a community type of travel experience back to Portugal or whatever would be very, very helpful in that way.
Indeed, yeah, that's obviously one of the best ways. A couple of other comments I'd like to get from you, and that is, we hear also from young people that the festas and these events are a lot of work, and they are.
Yes,
If you've
yes,
ever been involved, and both of you have, they are a lot of work. And
yes,
so, and you mentioned something. There's like with a tie to the fishing industry, as people become more professional, in other words, in other
right,
professions, and they were
right, right,
professions within the fishing industry, but as they
right,
become involved in other professions that were not traditional in the Portuguese
right,
American community, whether it be fishing in San Diego, constructions
right,
in the Bay Area, the farming and dairying in Central California,
right,
then they become, as you said, doctors and lawyers, accountants, business people from all walks of life, technology. Their lives are a lot more demanding. Their phones are always ringing, like Inês,
right,
showed us there at the beginning. It's a busy life. And I hear this. I don't know if any of you hear this, but I hear this from young people because of my teaching at the university now in the last few years. And even before that, when I was teaching in high school, I heard a lot that high schoolers are different, but I mean from their young parents, is that I don't have, I don't have 2 days a week to dedicate to the Portuguese American community, although I love my culture, but I don't have 2 days a week. My parents did, because my parents, that was their life. And we have that in Portuguese language schools that at one time were very present in California, the community schools where my two kids went to learn Portuguese. I mean, they knew Portuguese from home, but where they went to learn to read and write, as Inês did, where they went, on Monday nights for 2.5 hours a day. Now these community schools still exist, but in some areas they've died off because they're competing with ballet and with baseball and tennis and everything else. And for some of our kids, or those of us who are a little bit older, that generation of kids who may be now in their 40s, it was the only way that their parents let them go do something. If it was at the Portuguese school or the marcha or the folklore or the band, that was the only way that they had to leave home and to go someplace that mom and dad would let you attend. It's a different world now, so we're competing with all these. So do we look at technology maybe as a way to infuse it? And do we look at what San Diego did, for example, a few years ago, which is, and Zeca, kudos to you, and Lynette, and a couple other people, but kudos to you and Lynette for all of your work, which is getting Portuguese started at the high school, because that is one way to have the kids kind of get involved. They have to take a language class. Why not Portuguese? And then they also are seeing their Hispanic friends take Portuguese. And so it's no longer a language that's just spoken by a vol, who doesn't speak well Portuguese or English, I should say, but it's a language that even Hispanic kids want to learn. So do we have to, my whole conversation of this is, and I'll start with Inês again on this, do we have to maybe invent some new ways in the American mainstream where our culture is, that people don't have to go and spend 2 days a week working at the association because they don't have time, but they can everything from the foods to everything else. Because I'm a proponent, and tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I see in the future is that if we don't have more Portuguese restaurants, if our organizations start closing up for one reason or another in different areas, they're the ones still cooking Portuguese food. So do we need to make our community a little bit more present in the American mainstream, where people can have access to things without putting in the work for it, or without having all that time commitment, because they really don't have the time that my father had time, because of his job, and the need for it. And the younger generations don't have either the time, or also they don't have the need for it. They don't have the need for Portugal to be present in their life 24/7. Inês, what's your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are that they absolutely want to be connected in the way that they want to make it fit into their lives. And one of the things that I've noticed is that you're talking about food. Well, you can get food at a Portuguese restaurant or you can get it at a festa or at a club, but there's a lot of things going on YouTube, and a lot of people are posting a lot of, cooking, how to make this and that. And during the pandemic, I know a lot of people brushed up on their Portuguese cooking skills. Um, and I feel that it's becoming more, digital in terms of getting information. But I think it's very, the classes that are being done, for example, by this young man, Jeremiah, in Sacramento,
Mhm.
are being well received and attended. It just shows that they are interested in knowing what grandma used to make, or maybe, they don't have the recipe because their grandmother passed away. And so keeping them connected to the culture in the new digital era, and Zoom. I think these conversations that we're having right now, this exchange, if we were to do it with if, younger people, that what would you like to know that that your grandparents never told you. I think this is also another way to connect where they don't have to leave their house. um,
Mhm.
I asked my son the other day, how are you meeting people in Los Angeles? He just moved there. And he goes, well, through Zoom. we
Yeah.
we talked through Zoom. I said, okay, but he is going to have a barbecue on 4th of July, so that they're getting together. But yeah, I think food is a big thing. Um, it doesn't require a lot of time. You can watch something and then you can make it at your home and you can post it and you can say, hey, I just made a Madeira dish. I did that last week for my mom and some friends that visited from Venezuela. Beef de tune.
Yeah. Mm.
Not from San Diego, but who knows? Maybe they were. But anyway,
So using a little bit more of the digital connection
I
to
think the
Right.
digital
bring it into the
connection
mainstream.
is where it's at. We need to just embrace it, whether we like it or not. That's where our kids are, and we just need to be there. We need to be where they are.
Okay. Zeca, your thoughts?
I just wanted, before I forgot, wanted to let you know that Portuguese 7/8 has been approved by the district.
Great.
So
It's growing.
yeah, and Zed's doing well. We need another teacher, but anyway, so that's one good way we're trying to keep Portuguese alive here in San Diego. And how difficult that was, but it seems to finally be. Yeah. um I agree. I mean, I think that allowing or giving the younger generation um, an experience, and whether it be, like Inês says, the travel experience, or be uh, maybe some presentations about, who we are and where we came from, or whatever those things may be. But whatever will ignite uh, that being proud of their culture, and at that point people start to share. It's kind of unfortunate here in San Diego, we never really had a Portuguese restaurant, so we don't have that connection. I mean, the hall makes food, and so I think all our festivals are so popular because people come to eat the food that they haven't eaten in a long time. And part of the reason that the we haven't been able to get a Portuguese restaurant is because the men were always gone, right? The woman was mother and father and had to take care of grandpa and grandma and whoever else, so she never had any time to really invest in a restaurant. Besides, you want food, you eat at home, right? That was
Sure.
kind of the mentality at one point. But it's kind of sad that I think if we had that, it would be a good connection for a lot of people to come back and you know, kind of learn more about their roots. So.
Indeed. Well, it was a fascinating conversation. I promised you around an hour, and it's been an hour and a half, but it was been
No problem.
fascinating. I need to bring both of you back into a different format for some other issues that we think we need to talk about in the Portuguese American community. Zek, I'd love to you and I to dive into a presentation one day about the Matriarchal Society of San Diego, because
Absolutely.
I actually first started learning that with a presentation a long time ago, very long time ago. I'm dating myself, from Maria Jose Brantwas, that used to be there in San Diego.
Right.
And she made a presentation many years ago about the role of the woman in society, the Portuguese society in San Diego. And I think that's something that we'd like to tackle. And of course, Inês, looking at also the community itself and in the East Bay, and how it's going to move forward. There's lots of conversations to be held. So thank you both for this fascinating and wonderful exchange of ideas for the last hour and a half, for sharing your time with all of us. I want to let everyone know who is watching that we have another one of these on the 8th and another one on the 15th of July for our summer series. Thank you, Zeca Rodrigues. Thank you, Inês Eiras. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And this will be archived at the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI Fresno State YouTube channel, and also in our library in our oral history. Again, thank you both, and wonderful Dia da Madeira. Viva a Madeira já agora.
Viva a Madeira. Muito obrigada.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you for,
Viva a Madeira.